the baby shower, my husband laughed and announced, "With her, I'd rather stay childless than raise kids with that kind of negativity," to his whole family. Everyone burst into laughter. I clenched my fists and walked toward the door. But as I stood there shaking with humiliation, what Caden and his smug family didn't realize was that they'd just publicly insulted the senior financial analyst at Peterson & Associates, who manages $34 million in client portfolios and earns $165,000 annually. More importantly, I'd been quietly documenting every instance of their systematic emotional abuse for months, building what amounted to a comprehensive legal case, while they thought I was just a grieving housewife they could mock without consequences. My name is Emma, and for the past 3 months since my mother's death, I'd watched my husband transform from an occasionally supportive partner into someone who treated my grief like a personal inconvenience. What he didn't know was that my 15-year career in financial analysis had taught me to recognize patterns, document evidence, and build strategic responses to hostile situations. His family was about to learn that the woman they'd been systematically degrading actually held more power than any of them had ever possessed. The baby shower incident was the culmination of weeks of escalating cruelty. Caden's sister had been pregnant and expecting everyone to celebrate while I was still processing the loss of my only real family member. I'd made the effort to attend, brought an expensive gift, and tried to participate, despite feeling emotionally raw. But the moment someone mentioned children and family planning, Caden saw his opportunity to get laughs at my expense. With her, I'd rather stay childless than raise kids with that kind of negativity, he'd announced, gesturing toward me like I was an object rather than his wife of 8 years. The room erupted in genuine laughter, his mother adding, "Well, at least you're being realistic about what kind of mother she'd make." I left without saying a word, but my analytical mind was already processing the implications. This wasn't just casual cruelty. It was a public declaration that I was viewed as fundamentally defective by people who depended on my income for their comfortable lifestyle. Because what none of them understood was that I paid for 67% of our household expenses, while Caden contributed his modest $48,000 IT support salary. That night, instead of crying or confronting Caden emotionally, I did what I always do when facing a complex problem. I opened a spreadsheet and began quantifying the situation. By 2 a.m., I had a comprehensive analysis of our marriage that would have impressed my most demanding clients. Financial contribution analysis. Over our 8-year marriage, I had contributed $847,000 to our joint expenses, while Caden contributed $312,000. I had funded the down payment on our house, purchased all major appliances, covered our insurance premiums, and subsidized every family vacation. Meanwhile, Caden spent roughly $340 monthly on personal expenses like golf memberships and bar nights, while I maintained our entire lifestyle. But the real revelation came when I analyzed the pattern of emotional abuse I'd been experiencing. Using the same systematic approach I used for client risk assessments, I identified 17 distinct incidents over the past 6 months where Caden had publicly or privately degraded me, dismissed my grief, or blamed me for the family's emotional climate. Each incident was documented with dates, witnesses, and specific quotes I'd been recording on my phone. The baby shower comment wasn't an isolated moment of poor judgment. It was part of a calculated campaign to position me as the problem in our marriage, while he maintained his image as the reasonable, patient husband dealing with his difficult wife. Monday morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change the trajectory of our relationship forever. First, I called Margaret Hoffman, a family law attorney I'd worked with on several client referrals over the years. Margaret specialized in high-asset divorces and had built her practice representing successful women whose contributions had been systematically devalued by their spouses. "Emma, Based on what you're describing, this sounds like classic financial and emotional abuse disguised as marital frustration. With your income level and documented evidence, you'd be looking at a very favorable settlement. More importantly, the pattern you're documenting suggests systematic psychological abuse that courts take seriously, especially when children might be involved. Second, I called David Fletcher, a forensic accountant who'd helped several of my clients uncover hidden assets during divorce proceedings. David, I need a complete financial analysis of an 8-year marriage with detailed asset separation. I have comprehensive records, but I want a professional assessment of contributions and projected outcomes. Third, I called Rebecca Torres, a private investigator who specialized in domestic relations cases and had handled background research for some of my high-net-worth clients. Rebecca, I need surveillance and documentation services for a case involving systematic emotional abuse. The subject believes he's in control of the situation, but I need evidence of his actual activities and associations. By 10 a.m., I had scheduled consultations with all 3 professionals and begun implementing a strategic response that would systematically dismantle Caden's comfortable assumptions about our marriage. The beauty of having a successful career in financial analysis is that you develop a network of professionals who owe you favors from profitable referrals. Margaret's firm had earned approximately $47,000 in fees from clients I'd referred over the past 5 years. David's accounting practice had gained 3 major clients through my recommendations, generating roughly $89,000 in revenue. Rebecca's investigation services had been used by 4 of my clients, resulting in about $23,000 in fees. When successful professionals need strategic advice, they don't pay standard rates. They call in favors and get priority service. Wednesday afternoon, I met with Margaret for a comprehensive legal strategy session. Her analysis was more favorable than I'd expected. Emma, Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally. In your case, with documented evidence of your disproportionate financial contributions and systematic emotional abuse, you'd likely retain 60 to 70% of marital assets. More importantly, given your income and his limited earning capacity, he'd probably owe you nothing in spousal support while you'd receive reasonable child support if you decide to have children post-divorce. Margaret's team had also researched Caden's employment history and financial prospects. His IT support position was essentially entry-level despite 8 years of experience. His company had undergone 2 rounds of layoffs in the past year, and his department was considered expendable. Meanwhile, my position was considered essential, and I'd received 3 promotion offers from competing firms in the past 18 months. The financial disparity is so significant that any judge would question why you'd need support from someone earning less than 1/3 of your income. This puts you in complete control of the divorce timeline and terms. Thursday morning, David presented his forensic accounting analysis, and the results were devastating for Caden's position. Emma, your individual contributions to this marriage are extraordinary. You've essentially been subsidizing his lifestyle while building substantial personal wealth. Your investment portfolio, retirement accounts, and personal savings total approximately $340,000, all accumulated through your individual efforts. Meanwhile, his personal assets total roughly $12,000, mostly in checking accounts and a car that's underwater on the loan. David's analysis revealed something even more damaging. Caden had been spending joint credit card money on personal expenses without my knowledge, totaling approximately $8,400 over the past year. Each transaction was documented and legally questionable as unauthorized use of marital funds. If you divorce, you'd retain your individual assets plus approximately 65% of joint assets. He'd leave with essentially nothing except his car and personal belongings. More importantly, his credit rating would be severely damaged by the debt restructuring, while yours would remain pristine. Friday afternoon, Rebecca provided the final piece of the puzzle with her preliminary investigation results. Emma, your husband's activities during his grief processing periods are questionable. I've documented him at bars and recreational facilities when he claimed to be helping friends or needing space. More significantly, he's been discussing your marriage negatively with coworkers and acquaintances, describing you as unstable and difficult. This creates a pattern of character assassination that supports your emotional abuse claims. Rebecca had also investigated Caden's family's financial situation, and the results explain their investment in maintaining control over our marriage. His parents were living primarily on Social Security and part-time employment. His sister relied on occasional freelance work and financial help from family members. Caden's contributions to family events and gifts were actually funded through our joint accounts, meaning I was subsidizing their lifestyle without realizing it. They have a financial incentive to keep you married to Caden because you're indirectly supporting their family's standard of living. This explains why they're invested in portraying you as the problem rather than acknowledging his behavior. By the following Monday, I had a comprehensive strategy that would give me complete control over our marriage's outcome. But before implementing the nuclear option, I decided to give Caden one opportunity to acknowledge the problem and commit to genuine change. That evening, I approached him with documented examples of his behavior and a clear explanation of how our marriage would need to restructure for me to stay. Caden, I need you to understand that your behavior toward me constitutes emotional abuse, and I won't continue living in a situation where I'm systematically disrespected while providing financial support for people who view me as fundamentally inadequate. His response was predictably dismissive. You're being dramatic about normal married couple stuff. My family loves you. They just think you could handle your mom's death better. Your sister announced to a room full of people that I'd be a terrible mother, and you agreed with her. That's not love. That's systematic degradation. It was just family joking around. You take everything too seriously. That's when I realized Caden's dismissiveness wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. He benefited from a system where I absorbed criticism and financial responsibility while he maintained his image as the patient, reasonable husband. Changing that dynamic wasn't in his interest. Thursday morning, I began implementing phase 1 of my strategic response. I opened individual accounts at a different bank and redirected my paycheck deposits, leaving only enough in our joint accounts to cover my proportional share of essential expenses. I also removed Caden as an authorized user on my personal credit cards and investment accounts. The response was immediate and predictable. By Friday afternoon, Caden was asking questions about money that he'd never needed to think about before. The mortgage payment bounced. Did something happen with the bank? I restructured our financial arrangements. You'll need to cover your proportional share of expenses going forward. What does that mean? It means you pay for 50% of household expenses instead of 33%. The math was uncomfortable for Caden because 50% of our actual expenses was approximately $2,800 monthly, while his take-home pay was roughly $3,200. For the first time in our marriage, he'd have to budget carefully instead of treating money as an unlimited resource funded by my income. I also stopped providing services that I'd been handling without compensation. No more managing social calendars, researching family gifts, coordinating household maintenance, or organizing family activities. If Caden wanted those things handled, he could handle them himself or hire someone. The changes were subtle but immediate. Within a week, Caden was dealing with logistical challenges he'd never had to consider. When his mother called expecting an expensive birthday gift, he had to explain that gift purchases were no longer automatically funded through our joint accounts. When his car needed repairs, he couldn't assume the expense would be absorbed by our household budget. 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Caden attempted to negotiate a return to our previous financial structure, but with conditions that revealed his true priorities. Look, this separate money thing isn't working. Can we go back to pooling everything, but maybe you could try being more positive around my family? What does being more positive mean? Just not taking everything so personally. They're trying to help when they give advice about handling grief better. So I should accept criticism about my emotional responses while continuing to subsidize family events where people insult me? It's not insulting, it's family being honest. That's when I knew reconciliation was impossible. Caden viewed his family's systematic cruelty as acceptable because it maintained his position within their hierarchy. My emotional well-being was less important than his social comfort. Friday morning, I called Margaret and scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss divorce filing procedures. I'm ready to proceed with dissolution. I want this handled quickly and comprehensively. Margaret's team had been preparing for this possibility and had draft paperwork ready for my review. The terms were exactly what our strategic analysis had predicted. I would retain approximately 70% of our assets, including sole ownership of our house, while Caden would leave with minimal resources and significant debt obligations. Emma, with your documentation and financial position, this should be a straightforward process. He has no legal basis to contest the asset division, and his behavior pattern supports your claims of emotional abuse. I expect we can have final papers within 6 to 8 weeks. But before filing, I wanted to give Caden's family one final opportunity to understand the consequences of their systematic cruelty. Saturday afternoon, I invited Caden's parents and sister for dinner, ostensibly to discuss our marriage problems and find solutions. What I actually planned was a strategic presentation that would demonstrate exactly how much their behavior was going to cost them. They arrived expecting to stage an intervention about my attitude and grief management. Instead, they found themselves facing a comprehensive financial analysis of how their family dynamics had created an unsustainable situation. I wanted to discuss the economics of our family relationships, I began, projecting a spreadsheet onto our TV screen. Over the past 8 years, I've contributed approximately $847,000 to household expenses, while Caden contributed $312,000. This disparity has allowed him to maintain the generous family provider image you've all grown accustomed to. The room went very quiet as they processed the numbers. Additionally, analysis of our joint expenses shows approximately $23,000 spent on family gifts, events, and contributions over the past 3 years. Since my income funded roughly 67% of our household budget, I've personally contributed about $15,400 to maintaining your family's social activities. Caden's mother started to interrupt, but I continued with the presentation. The issue isn't money, it's respect. You've spent years treating me as fundamentally inadequate while benefiting from my financial contributions. This creates an unsustainable dynamic that I'm no longer willing to support. I clicked to the next slide, showing projected outcomes under different scenarios. If our marriage continues under current conditions, I'll continue subsidizing family activities while accepting systematic emotional abuse. If our marriage ends, Caden's ability to contribute to family events will decrease by approximately 70%, and my contributions will obviously end completely. The financial implications were stark. Caden's take-home pay after divorce would be roughly $2,600 monthly after debt obligations. His contributions to family gifts and events would effectively disappear. The choice is yours, I concluded. You can acknowledge that your treatment of me has been inappropriate and commit to respectful behavior going forward, or you can prepare for a significant reduction in your family's financial resources. Caden's sister was the first to speak. You can't just threaten to destroy our family because you don't like family dynamics. I'm not destroying anything. I'm explaining the financial reality of treating your primary financial supporter as disposable. Caden's mother tried a different approach. Honey, we never meant to hurt you. Maybe we were just trying to help you process your grief better. By announcing that I'd be a terrible mother? By agreeing that I'm too negative to raise children? That's not help, that's systematic degradation. The conversation continued for another hour with various family members trying to minimize their behavior while avoiding any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Finally, Caden's father attempted to establish dominance through intimidation. "Young lady, you need to understand that family comes first. If you can't handle some honest feedback, maybe you're not suited for this family." That was the moment I knew there would be no reconciliation. "Actually, Richard, I think you need to understand that I'm not required to accept abuse in exchange for the privilege of funding your lifestyle. This conversation is over." I stood up, gathered my presentation materials, and walked toward our bedroom. "Caden, please escort your family out. They're no longer welcome in my house." The room erupted in protests and threats, but I closed the bedroom door and called Margaret's emergency line. "Margaret, I need papers filed first thing Monday morning. Full dissolution with prejudice, citing systematic emotional abuse and financial exploitation." Monday morning, Caden was served with divorce papers at his workplace, which created exactly the professional embarrassment I'd intended. His family's reaction was swift and predictable. They contacted me demanding I reconsider, offering various compromises that involved me accepting their behavior in exchange for vague promises of future improvement. But I was done negotiating with people who viewed basic respect as a generous concession rather than a minimum requirement. The divorce proceedings moved efficiently because Caden had no legal grounds to contest the asset division or abuse claims. Rebecca's investigation had provided documented evidence of his character assassination campaign among co-workers. David's forensic accounting made the financial situation indisputable. Margaret's legal strategy anticipated every argument Caden's attorney attempted. 6 weeks after filing, I had a final divorce decree that awarded me sole ownership of our house, 73% of our joint assets, and complete freedom from people who had systematically devalued my contributions while benefiting from my success. The financial aftermath was immediate and devastating for Caden's family. Without my income subsidizing their lifestyle, family gatherings became potluck affairs instead of elaborate dinners. Gift exchanges were limited to homemade items rather than expensive purchases. Caden moved back in with his parents because he couldn't afford independent housing after debt restructuring. Most satisfying was watching them realize that the woman they'd mocked as too negative to be a good mother had been the only thing standing between them and serious financial consequences. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I received a promotion to senior portfolio manager with a salary increase to $192,000 annually, plus expanded benefits and equity options. My professional recognition was substantial, and my personal life was peaceful for the first time in years. 6 months later, Caden's mother called requesting financial assistance for medical expenses, apparently expecting that, divorced or not, I'd remain a reliable source of emergency funds. "Dorothy, I'm sure you'll find a way to handle your medical expenses. Perhaps Caden can help, though I understand money is tight since he's living with you again. But you always helped family when we were having problems." That's interesting, because I seem to remember being told I wasn't really family. Something about not being suited for your family? But I'm sure I misunderstood since family members don't usually publicly mock each other's fitness for parenthood. Long silence. "Emma, maybe we could work something out. Maybe if we all tried to be more understanding." "Dorothy, I'm perfectly content with my current level of understanding. I understand exactly how you view me, and you understand exactly how much that perspective costs." 1 year after the divorce, I bought a beautiful townhouse in an upscale neighborhood and began dating Marcus Webb, a fellow financial analyst who actually respects my intelligence and contributes equally to our relationship expenses. We're planning to start a family next year, funded entirely through our combined 6-figure earnings. Sometimes I drive past the modest apartment complex where Caden now lives with his parents, struggling to make ends meet on his reduced income. The building represents the natural consequence of systematically degrading someone whose competence and resources you depend on. Caden learned that publicly humiliating your financially successful wife has calculable costs. His family learned that mocking someone's parenting potential while depending on their income leads to predictable outcomes. And I learned that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply removing your competence and resources from people who never valued them appropriately. They got exactly what they claimed to want: a life without my negativity, my contributions, and my presence. The only thing they didn't anticipate was how expensive that freedom would be.